future. Thank you so much for joining us today at this industry roundtable hosted by the Miami Association of Realtors and the Builders Association of South Florida. What you need to know as South Florida responds to Surfside. You know, the world changed for us in so many ways. On June 24th, the faith in the places that we live was a bit shaken for so many people. The trust in the actual brick and mortar of the places that we live is now in question. And the comfort for so many in government oversight for the safety and our welfare, that really for a lot of people has vanished. And that may be temporary, but it's true. So we, as a local journalist, we were there from the very beginning. We were documenting not only the horror, but what was to come, the beginnings of the investigation, unearthing documents, talking to people, picking brains. That was sort of our part as this unfolds today. Over the next hour here, we're discussing how this building collapse really impacts the future of South Florida real estate, the building industry, the condo industry in South Florida, and how local government is thinking about changing, really must act to change to enhance building safety and consumer confidence, which has to go hand in hand. So panelists today joining us, Danielle Blake, Chief of Public Policy at the Miami Association of Realtors. She's been with the board since 2005 and previously worked in the Florida Senate, House of Representatives, and the International Affairs Office, the Secretary of State, before joining Realtors. Jose Gonzalez is president of the Builders Association of South Florida. He's also the executive vice president for Florida East Coast Industries, which completed the Brightline Virgin train service from Miami to West Palm 2 years ago. Wow, that seems like yesterday, 2 years ago. County Commissioner Raquel Regalado, who is chairing a special subcommittee created by the commission chair, Jose Pepe Diaz, to serve as a clearinghouse for the information that the county is gathering as it works with the mayor and so many local and state and federal partners in figuring out where to go next here. Julio Robina is both a former state rep and also the former mayor of South Miami. And as a legislator, he was known for his consumer-focused work as chair of the Select Committee on Condominiums and Homeowners Association Governance and Homeowners Rights. Lots to talk about there today. And today he's currently a partner in the property management group that works with condo management and associations. Peter Iglesias is the city manager at Coral Gables. He also has a background in engineering and building safety. And before joining Coral Gables, he was the senior director of building, planning and zoning, historical structures, and IT integration with the city of Miami. And also Ana Maria Rodriguez, right now a state senator for us, and also with the Building Association and Realtors Association, Miami Realtors.
Yes.
So welcome everybody. And it is my honor to field this and moderate this today. And as a think tank, this is an amazing group of expertise. And I'm hoping that as we address and as we present, we can cut through some of the dicey politics that govern condo and building safety, because I think from what we have learned at Local 10, a lot of that may have contributed in the long term. Certainly no finger pointing at this point at all, but certainly some of the infrastructure of all of that has contributed to the disaster we are now talking about. So Danielle, let's start with you. If you would give us a sense of the local condo market, what it looks like today. Certainly it is diverse for sure. And do so please in the context of what is happening now. For instance, age of buildings, new condos, the difference and the market.
Lena, I hope you're going to be able to hear me. So if you don't, I'll just let Ana Maria take over. Okay, perfect. Good. Okay, so condominiums in general, and Julio can tell you this, they're very complex. You have many different models. A lot of townhouses are also registered as condominiums. You've got multifamily, you've got some commercial buildings mixed with residential, you've got hotel condos, so a portion is dedicated for hotel use, all different kinds of condominiums. So when you say what the condominium market looks like and the makeup of it, it's very diverse in South Florida. Moving forward, and I am very, very proud to say that Miami-Dade and Broward are the only two counties in Florida that have a 40-year recertification process. So part of the conversation is how is that going to change moving forward? You know, instead of 40 years, they may reduce it to something like 25 to start the process and end at 30, or some of the things we've heard. I know Commissioner Regalado has been very involved and will give us some insight into that. And then also, you know, moving forward, should this be done not only at the 25-year mark, but should it have more frequent inspections? Maybe we're just looking at roof this year, and then maybe next year we're going to look at a different element of the building. So those are some of the conversations that are going around in South Florida. Again, I just want to emphasize that Miami-Dade and Broward are the only two. And so now there's conversations about, should we take this statewide?
So let me ask you a question about the 40-year recertification, because Champlain Tower South was in it. And there was evidence that we found in the building records in Surfside, not only for this particular building, but for all buildings. It was kind of lax the way the 40-year recertification process is done. Is that fair to say? Is that a valid objective assessment? And how much of an issue would that be for a building like this one that really does have issues?
You know, Glenna, to be honest with you, it's a little bit lax, but I think the bigger issue is the fact that the association didn't have enough in their budget reserves to cover the repairs. Because I can tell you, if they had been putting money aside and the money was in the reserve account, they would not have delayed fixing this building. And that's the important part. From the evidence that we've seen, honestly, I mean, other than, I know that there were delays in the building, and a lot of that has to do with the current way that we're doing association management. They were being very proactive. They got engineering reports. They were having meetings. It's the fact they didn't have the money in the budget reserves to do the repairs, or is why the repairs were put off for.
I guess that begs the question that I know our other panelists are going to talk about. Why didn't they have the money? What is the component of making sure that a volunteer, largely layperson condo board who faces backlash from residents, many of whom might live on fixed incomes, how do you make sure in the long term, little by little, that those condo boards do have enough money to do life safety work in the building?
Glenna,
and I think that's probably a question someone else wants to answer.
Julio can take it. He's an expert on this one.
Yeah, and thank you. First of all, thank you, Glenna, for doing this on your off day. We really appreciate it. And to the distinguished panel, I want everyone on this meeting to understand that this group of people is working hard every day to try to prevent these disasters from happening in the future. But let's go to these questions. Well-intentioned board members, unfortunately, your question, why didn't have money? Because in Florida, people have the right, meaning the associations have the right to waive their reserves. And I would tell you, maybe Danielle can give you the exact numbers. We're thinking more than 90% of condos in Florida waive their reserves. Why? Because you're asking owners to tack on an additional, call it increase in another maintenance payment that they would have to make to the association. So that's pretty much the reason why they don't have funds. And I'll talk about that when we get to my segment. But that's a problem. And I think we're going to look at some potential changes this year, making it mandatory. And finally, if I may, great volunteers, but you've got to understand that a board member's number one responsibility is to maintain the integrity of those buildings. Where was the property manager who has a license and should have advised them as soon as that report popped up? You need to drop what you're doing. If there's no funds, you need to specially assess because the reserves were not there. And then finally, that there should have been at least an emergency meeting to discuss it. You don't push things off that we consider life safety for 2 years down the line. Where was the attorney in that association that should have advised them what to do?
Well, we do know that Champlain Tower South was already assessed. They were in the middle of paying. Off the top of my head, I can't remember the number. I do remember it was an eye-popping number for a lot of the units in a fairly recent large assessment to make up for the work that had been kicked down the road.
It had, but not sufficiently. But I'll get into that in depth as we go into the segment of reserves and reserve calculations and so forth.
So, okay, so let's rather than go rogue on the script, let's circle back, Danielle. What the people right now, the real estate market in South Florida is pretty amazing at the moment. From what we see, maybe you have a different assessment of that, but now the condo market per se, has that been affected by the perception of what happened?
What we're seeing so far, it has not impacted it, but I think the magic date is going to be August 23rd, which is when the July sales numbers come out, and then we'll be able to see the true impact.
What are you expecting? I'm sure you have a sort of lay of the land leading up to August 23rd.
So we did do a survey of our members and asked them, tell us what's happening, give us feedback. We had about 8 responses who told us that they had been impacted directly by the tragedy that happened in Surfside, but overall condos were still moving forward.
How
impacted is in probably the most egregious example or when the buyers are trying to get out of the contract that they currently have. But for the most part, it had to do with where they wanted to purchase. So they no longer wanted to purchase on the coastal lines, or they didn't want to purchase in a building that was over 40 years old. But those are very small examples. Overall, they were still moving forward.
Yeah. What's the percentage of, when you say older, I'm guessing 40 years or older, the percentage or the ratio of condos in South Florida, old and then newer?
So Pedro Garcia's office just released all of the building information that partly due to the media's request. So he's put it on his website and you can go in and search that. It's very valuable and very helpful. Again, you have to break it down into which type of condominiums that you're talking about. I did read an article in the Wall Street Journal that said that 2/3 were over that, and they used a third party to collect that information. And again, the magic number is the 40-year. So, I think we need to segment it and focus in on certain buildings to define that question. And I don't have that answer today.
Got it. Okay. All right, so let's pivot now to the building industry and with that, consumer confidence. Jose, let's talk a little bit about the Building Association of South Florida and this sort of moment that we're in. Residents reacting, media reacting, a lot of public records because of media hounding all of the public officials that really we hadn't hounded for any reason before this. What do people need to know now about how South Florida's building industry is reacting to what happened, or is it?
Well, thank you, Glenna. It's important to have these conversations. I want to thank also Commissioner Regalado for helping us bring together and having these open forums. Consumers look towards their government to say, are you keeping us safe? And part of that is how we, the regulated industry, react to that. BASF has been around for over 77 years. So we've seen a lot of these buildings come up, and as always, we see an evolution in codes. Peter Iglesias, who is a superb structural engineer, and he can attest that it's a fluid process as we learn more about how buildings react and as we grow bigger as a community. You want to look at downtown Miami and look at our skyline, how it's evolved, and how the coastal line also evolved. And you've seen that evolve through the years. And all these codes have safety factors. They've always had safety factors. When you look at the industry follows these codes, and that's what we always tell people: hire licensed contractors. Make sure whatever you're doing, hire licensed contractors, even for your maintenance work. But it's important because they're following a standard that is put out there by the government, and those standards have safety factors in them. So these columns, and now as you're starting to see they dissect the project and you see what had happened and what went wrong, you start seeing that things weren't followed the way they should have been followed. Things weren't maintained the way they should have been maintained. And so consumers need to understand that, from when a building is being built, you can have the right to research it. You have the right to look back at and when you're either buying a house or you're buying a condo, that's public information. That's information that you can go to your local municipality and find out about the 40-year certifications. I think most people in South Florida never knew what a 40-year certification was, right? Until this moment. I mean, we'll tell you that wasn't in their vocabulary. It is in the building industry's vocabulary, and it's something that we always work with. Predominantly when we develop a building, developers and builders don't stay around for the 40 years. It's turned over. But a lot of times, whether somebody buys an older building and rehabs it, you have that case too. And we know about the 40-year certifications, and most of our contractor members work with them. And to say, we talked up front, and we said, are they being lax with the process? Well, a lot of times these associations have a due process, and not they feel like, okay, I've got to get an engineer, and they don't like what that engineer says, and so they do shop it around. And that's one of the things that I think in the process it could be tightened, and those rules, just like after Hurricane Andrew, we saw changes in the building codes, we saw changes in standards, because we learned about things that worked and things that didn't work. And so as part of the industry, we're continuously always evolving in that.
So the laws and the codes that are on the books, and I know the vernacular is that South Florida has probably the strongest building codes in the country. Mm-hmm. And that's the context of that is, and correct me if I'm wrong, is windstorm. They're strong because of the windstorm component. And laws and codes are only as good as the people who follow them. And so we've already seen indications that 41 years ago, Champlain Tower South, despite there being codes and laws on the books, was built with some cut corners and was not built to exact specifications. So how do you instill consumer confidence in people who see the laws and see the codes and yet see them not being followed by people in the industry?
And I will tell you, from the building industry, is hire licensed, reputable contractors. That's always an important thing. I will tell you, 100% of our members are people who've been around in business for well over 40, 50 years, and they are following these rules. They're following the guidelines that they're given. They're in any industry. There are people who cut corners. I'm not going to shy away from that. And it's both on the governmental side, who's observing that and supposed to be looking at how are those checks and balances happening, from the inspectors to the professionals. I will tell you, after Hurricane Andrew, there were a lot of lessons learned there, and I'm sure Peter can tell you his experiences with roofs falling off, and if we remember Country Walk having all the damage it had, and it was because roofs were not nailed with like 1 or 2 nails. So there are people that historically have done things the wrong way. In today's code, I can tell you, people can be very confident because there are a lot of belts and suspenders process. People are not. It's, the fox is not guarding the hen house, as they say. We are required, and there's a lot of professionals who have put not only their license but their livelihood. It could be criminal if you actually do something the wrong way for these engineers. So they take it seriously. I would tell you, in today's standards, people are following that. In buildings that were built upon a time, I think you have to be vigilant. You have to do your due diligence, and you have to make sure that as you buy in a condo, you go and you pull the records, and you have somebody who's helping you, whether through your realtor, or your other professionals, your inspectors, your building inspectors, that can work with your realtors to actually identify if there's any gaps in that. So I think people are going to become more educated on that to make sure that their confidence when they're buying is up to speed.
Yeah, that's good advice. I guess my question is, if a buyer for a condo unit in Champlain Tower South prior to June 24th went into city records and tried to do his or her due diligence, and exactly what you were just talking about, would they have been able to find something that alerted them to issues?
And normally there are records on that 40-year certification. If it's missing, that should be a red flag. If your building has a 40-year certification, if you have an inspection, there is a record of any violations and things like that buildings have. Cities, especially in the digital world today, you can do it from your desktop and find out a lot of the records that these buildings have. Understanding that it is incumbent upon consumers to do a little bit more due diligence. And again, this tragedy serves as a lesson for us to fix maybe some of those records as well, because we've got to make sure that those records are front and center when people are having that, whether it's getting it from the association or the realtors. And I can tell you that in our industry, people are now a lot more cognizant about the 40-year. Not that we weren't oblivious to it, but now it's in the forefront of the discussion. It's unfortunate tragedies like this that bring it and bring the opportunity to correct whatever in the process has gaps. So this is something that we should be learning lessons from. And I'm sure everybody in this panel is an example of that. How are we going to make it better? And that's what the goal is.
And so in hindsight now, would you recommend that buildings, especially subject to coastal conditions, wait for 40 years? I think somebody mentioned that at the beginning of this presentation, that 40 years may be too long. What's your expert opinion on that?
And that I would tell you, every single expert that serves with us on the Builders Association has said 40 years is way too long. It could be, depending on the type of building, depending on the age of the building, it could be shorter. It could be biannual inspections. Somebody should always be checking on it. And it's incumbent upon those associations, as Julio was talking about. They do have professionals. They do have the building managers who those people should be writing reports and saying, we've got a problem here. There's cracking, there's falling, there's things that are happening. They're supposed to be doing on a daily basis, looking at their properties, right? They're maintaining their properties. They should know what's happening and report back. And maybe as a government starts creating new regulations, we should be looking at more timely, depending on each type of building, whether it's coastal, whether it's interior to the city, depending on the height of the building. You know, there are larger buildings than others. This was not a 2 or 3 story building. This was a significant size building that has a lot of weight on it, and it needs to be in a case by case basis. But the rules are going to change. That's one thing I can tell you, and we want those rules to change because we have to keep people safe, and that's the goal of our industry.
Yeah, there needs to be a legacy. Okay, Julio Robina, as a legislator a decade ago on condo reform, and you're now working in the industry. So talk about, we touched a little bit about condo reserves earlier. So let's take like a little deep dive into condo reserves. Mm-hmm. What do condo residents, do they need to change? Is it the residents' perception? Is it the condo boards? Is it the laws that govern who is even eligible to buy a condominium financially? What needs to change? Because clearly the money in the condo association for repairs is at the center of this discussion and this sort of issue as the investigation into CTS goes on.
And that's a great question. And I will tell you that you're going to see changes definitely coming this year. I work closely with the senator and with Danielle and the commissioner Regalado. I will tell you that reserves, again, I want to be very clear. In Florida, during the annual budget meeting, owners can basically opt out of having reserves. And I would say more than 90% of condominiums in Florida opt out. Why, Glenna? It's because you're asking them to tack on an additional, not even a small payment, a large payment on top of the normal maintenance to go into reserves. But it's got to stop.
Can I push back on that a little bit?
Sure.
The 90% that opt out can, because the Florida legislature allowed that.
Correct. And that's what we're saying. We're talking about a potential policy change where they will not be able to opt out anymore. But here's key. What we're looking at, and I'm working with a group of people that are looking at these ideas, including our senator, people in the Florida House, we need to stop that. Why? Because human nature is going to say, I don't want to tax myself. I don't want to put another fee upon myself. So they're voting it down, which, by the way, Danielle and Anna Maria can get into what it also hinders them with the ability with FHA and Freddie Mac and other things that affect them. But let's go to this point. When work needs to be done and there are no reserves because 90% of them are waiving it, what happens? The special assessment is what comes down the pipeline. And a lot of times those are short. They don't consider it. So let's go to policy. I think you will see this year a change of mandating no more waiving reserves, but how much? Are they going to require 10% of the budget to be considered? Would it be 25%? Will it be the full amount? That's one of the things that I think you will definitely see become a mandate. And more important than that is what these reserve studies, these reserve calculations. Nobody does that. And what is this for those that are watching us that don't understand what that is? It's basically where you hire professionals, engineers, people that are professionals in the field to come in and do, most of the time, a 5-year study on what's the life expectancy of the roof, of the paint, of the asphalt, of the elevators, of the pool. And then that gives them an idea how much it's going to be. Then they'll have that 5-year plan and they will know and can do the math on how much money they'll need to get into the reserves in order to have the funds readily available. Because this, I believe, is one of the problems with Champaign Towers. They had some money, they had done some special assessments, but they didn't have the full amount they needed to get the work done. So I think you're going to see those two things. And one other thing that I'll throw at you, you know, there's a lot of buildings, people know they're condos, but they're condo conversions. Let's not forget, we got a lot of them in Florida. And these are apartment buildings that were converted to condominiums. And then there comes this issue about the developer. A developer, when he walks away and he turns over the association to the unit owners, there needs to be some type of turnover reserve fund where it's not that they're keeping the developer's money, but there's a lump amount of money left in the reserve in case during the turnover there are problems, and it could be within 3 to 5 years. The owners don't have to specially assess. They can use those funds. And of course, if the years go by, 5 years tops, they can turn that money back to the developer. So those are 3 ideas, Glenna, that are being looked at. And then finally, I don't want to point fingers, but we can talk about all the great changes, but you must have people that guide our board members. These are volunteers. They're not professionals. They're not structural engineers. If they don't make the right decisions, then that word negligence comes up, and then here comes lawsuits and everything else that needs to be addressed. And as a result of that, I'll end on this. South Florida is looking at a bill right now, working with Senator Anna Maria, that will create the first ever condominium fraud task force. Because unfortunately in South Florida, I get hundreds of calls and people are not trusting to give another penny to any association board of directors because of the amount of fraud in this community. And what we don't have that check and balance. You have all these laws and you have a DBPR that's more after administrative problems. Where is the criminal element that is going to investigate fraud? It's coming. I don't want to elaborate on that because that would be a program into itself. And of course, you will see some changes, just as Jose is saying, and I'm sure the rest of the panel will tell you. Get ready. We just hope they're not knee-jerk reactions because this is going to cost money at the end of the day. And then our federal congressional delegation, I hope they're ready to help somehow because there's going to have to be some way to fund some of the costs because banks aren't loaning money. And finally, deferred maintenance for those who don't understand that. All these buildings that have not done what they were supposed to do, you see roofs caving in, you see more buildings being closed every day. Where's that money going to come from?
So I just want to circle back, Danielle, do you see this as having a real chilling effect on the future market, real estate market? Or I guess the flip side of that question is, are so many people from outside of South Florida who have gobs of money coming in, tearing down and not caring? Is that real estate market going to sway that way because locally it'll be unaffordable?
I guess when you say this, are you referring to the tragedy or are you referring to all the changes that we need that could increase the assessments
what
moving
Julio was
forward?
talking about is, he gave a lot of points, changes coming. All of them point to one direction, that we collectively as owners, as South Florida residents, aren't paying enough attention to spending the kind of money we need to spend on keeping buildings, especially older buildings, up to code and safe to live in. So just like we saw windstorm premiums and now we're seeing flood premiums sort of go in that same direction, all of this is making a real estate purchase in South Florida unaffordable to many people who may be able to afford it now. So I'm just kind of throwing out there, what's your projection of that?
I definitely think it's going to cost more for sure. I mean, we are looking at insurance. I think that's a group that we need to include in these conversations, Julio, moving forward and reach out, because Citizens has 85% of the policies in Florida for condominium buildings. And that is a state-run company. We own that as the Citizens of Florida. So we have to see how we're going to address insurance for condo buildings and their new requirements moving forward. So you're right. It is going to be more expensive. And I know a lot of people are pushing for increased reserve amount. What Julio was referring to is the 10% is the magic number that lenders use. So if you want to do FHA financing, the whole building has to be approved. And one of the requirements is that you have to have at least 10% going into a reserve account. So what Julio's point is it going to be 10%, or is it going to be what you fully need according to your reserve study? And that's another point. Reserve studies are not required. Julio passed legislation in 2008 requiring it. And then in 2010, when he was out of the legislature, he repealed it. So reserve studies are not required now, but should they be moving forward? All of that is going to cost more money, to your point. It is going to change real estate moving forward.
I want to ask one more question, and to Julio and Ana Maria, as a sitting senator, you may want to jump in on this. In reviewing, and to Danielle's point, a law was passed one term and repealed another term. As legislators, how do you maneuver lobbyists from the building industry, lobbyists from the condo associations, and what they need as industries with health and safety oversights and financial components to your constituents? I mean, that's got to be a tough balance, because those two interests are sometimes competing.
So Glenna, I'll go ahead and answer that. I think, up until now, the condominium lobby group has been very effective in staving off mandatory reserves and other things that would make it obviously more expensive for condominium owners or potential owners. And I think the tragedy in Surfside has really shaken up, not just here in South Florida, but all around the state. People are talking about this. And I think we've come to a point where we need to just say, okay, enough is enough. We need to really get serious about putting in the mandatory, whether it's 10%, 5%, I don't know what the percentages that we're going to have to mandate, but I'm not going to be filing a bill of that nature. But if one of my colleagues does, I think I would support it. I mean, I don't think, maybe 10%, to mandate 10% is probably too high, but maybe it's not. I don't know. We're going to be talking about that in the coming months in Tallahassee.
And let me chime in, Glenn, if I may. I got lobbied by the law firms representing associations, the property management lobby. And what they did is they would say that, well, everything that you're doing will make it not cost efficient for anybody to ever want to buy a condo in Florida. Sure. And the other thing was that these are board members, and they don't understand what's going on. That's why I think there should be a mandatory course for board members. No more this signing an affidavit that you understood what you read. That's another game being played in South Florida. But going to your point is that, I look at it this way, and I think this is the way the legislature needs to look at it now. Is the loss of lives worse backing away from this? Yes, things are going to cost a little more, but look at the tragedy. And if we can prevent any tragedies like this from ever happening again, we need to make the right decisions to make sure that these buildings have the funds to maintain it. Beauty of Florida, a lot of coastal area. One of the non-beautiful things, it comes with a sticker price.
Well, I can attest to that as a coastal resident, although not in a condo. The movie about the money pit is how we affectionately refer to our coastal property. So Peter, let's bring you into this conversation if we can. As a small city manager, or Coral Gables, I never considered a small city, but I guess in the grand scheme of things, it's kind of a small city. It's in many parts a very historically old city. parts on the coast, parts on the water. You've got to be, your constituents are looking at what happened in Surfside. I'm sure your phone has rung a couple of times. Please weigh in on it from a managing a city kind of similar to Surfside.
I think we've been fortunate because since the very beginning, the very inception of Coral Gables.
I'm going to ask you to speak a little louder, maybe closer to the mic.
I'm sorry, thank you. Since the very inception of Coral Gables has always had a city structural engineer. And so it's been really ahead of these issues. So, and that goes back to 1927. So for us, we've always had a kind of rigorous review of drawings, and not only from a zoning perspective, but also from a building code perspective. So I think our buildings are in pretty good shape. However, one thing I must say that people think because you move into a concrete building, there's no maintenance. And that's a major problem because you should start a maintenance program the moment you move in. And so you've got buildings that are 30 years old, forget about 40 years old, that have had zero maintenance done. Chaplain Towers, I've seen the plans for Chaplain Towers. That's an interesting project. It's got a number of issues, and I think we're going to have to address that in a different way. But from a normal building that's well designed and well engineered, you still have maintenance. And so I do think that as Jose said, I think that we all feel that 40 years is too long. Concrete, for instance, the moment you pour concrete, there's a gradual reduction in how concrete protects steel, and it depends on many factors. But as you get to about 25 to 30 years, it's time to review the building at that time. Maybe 25 for the coastal zone, maybe 30 years for the non-coastal zone, because certainly the coastal zone is much more aggressive. You've got the chloride, the salt damage, and but we live in a subtropical climate. There's a lot of water, there's a lot of humidity. And I think that people feel, well, I've got a concrete building, I don't need any maintenance, and these things happen. We've had a couple of buildings where we have had some issues. They were under 40 years. And so
I think to that point, in the past 2 months, I think more South Floridians know what spalling is and what rebar is than ever before. And I think you're right in that there's going to be a lot of focus on those two building materials. I want to go back to sort of a citywide focus because I know we in my industry had a lot of questions for the city of Surfside that's now putting its documents on the website for public inspection about Champlain Tower South. I find as a fact finder, I've learned that the amount of required city oversight over the past couple of decades into that building and others is really not a mandate. And through all the finger pointing, we know factually that the records, engineering reports, inspection reports are on file with the city. The city had what we're calling the Morabito report, the engineering report from 2018 that raised a giant red flag over the pool slab, the concrete slab that was I'm trying to remember the words verbatim, exponentially going to get worse in the years to come. That was just being looked at 3 years later. What needs to change in the city's mandated oversight to the buildings within it and the people who are responsible for those buildings?
I'm working with that ad hoc committee with the county now, and I think we have a number of issues. One is a reduction in the 40 years. To about to 30 to 25 to 30. The original 40-year recertification that was proposed was a 25-year recertification, and what finally passed was a 40-year recertification. So we're looking maybe 25 to 30 years, depending coastal, non-coastal zone. Another thing is to have, if we have buildings that are threshold buildings that are taller, that are bigger buildings, have a structural engineer provide the recertification. Because visual recertification and things like this that are required, you may have to have a more extensive inspection process that deals with checking of concrete and other testing procedures that should have been done certainly on Chaplain Towers. So upgrade that. Right now, you don't need to be a structural engineer to do a recertification of a building. You can be an architect, you can be an engineer. So for the taller buildings, have that recertification done by a structural engineer. Another thing is that when you have a report provided to the HOA, if the engineer has anything that is of consequence, have it mandatory be supplied to the building official. So the building official knows that there's a problem there. Not like not something like this where the HOA has a report, but it doesn't get to the actual building official. So we are proposing a number of these changes, which I think will really enhance that 40-year recertification. I think having looked at the plans of the Chaplin building and having been there, I think just the normal recertification would really is not enough in a building with that kind of distress and those kind of issues. So I do think that we need to relook at this 40-year recertification. And by the way, we are the only county that has an actual structural review for buildings in the state of Florida. The other counties have what they call a structural review. It's really a code review. It's very minor. It's not done by structural engineers. So something that came out of Andrew, which was the -- South Florida Building Code, which was an excellent code. And then in 2002, we went to a Florida Building Code, which is a building code that was that's part of the International Code Council. We use their building code as that standard, then we modify it as necessary. So since '94, we've had a very strong building code, and so I think for insurance purposes, they always look at '94 South Florida Building Code or the Florida Building Code. So I do think that we have learned our lesson through Hurricane Andrew. I'm not sure if the whole state has learned a lesson on that. So if you have a tall building outside of Dade County, where's the review? There is no review. Technically, there's no review. If you have a non-engineer, the building code has minimal implications to a tall building. That is high-rise practice. It's really not the building code has few issues that really affect those kind of buildings. So I do something interesting that Jose knows about, because he worked with us when I was in Miami, is the implementation of the structural peer review for tall buildings. And we implemented that at the city of Miami. It's very effective because you have a second look at that building and it's going to be by an engineer that has experience, extensive experience with that type of structure. In other words, if you're reviewing a 50-story building in Miami, it's got to be an engineer that has experience in 50-story or taller buildings, not somebody that's designed 5-story buildings, which are completely different, right? And so that structural peer review I think was very effective. It was very effective from a construction point of view because it expedited the work, but from a safety point of view, you have a structural peer review that is presented to the building department. The building department reviews the structural peer review. So now you've got, hopefully, large departments would have that expertise, and now you've got really 3 sets of eyes looking at those major projects. So that's something that we did in Miami that helped construction, at the same time helped safety.
Glenna,
Finally, Commissioner Raquel Regalado.
If I may piggyback on what
Sure.
Peter's saying, as you know, the city of Miami, which Peter was involved with for so many years, I recently met with the building department director and the unsafe structures director. And I don't know if you know, City of Miami put out letters recently, hundreds of them, to buildings that were 3 stories or more, that they couldn't find the paperwork on whether they had gotten their certified 40-year certification or 50. And they gave you 45 days to go out. After talking to these 2 men, which are very knowledgeable and are trying to be proactive for the city of Miami, they realized that we have one other problem. We need to make sure that not only do we require a private sector structural engineer to do the certification, but should we as government, be taking that as the Bible. When they come in and they do it, it's done. Where is government? These gentlemen are thinking that even though you paid and you pay a structural engineer, the city or the county or municipality should go out and verify that that report is valid. Leave it to South Florida. We are the capital of times, and I'm not saying that we don't. I would tell you that 90% or more of structural engineers are honest, hardworking men and women. But where's the check and balance? The cities, counties need to go out and verify that just because you hired someone and he has a license and he gave you the report and it's good to go, we didn't check and we took their word. Look what happened with the director, the gentleman in Surfside that went over to Doral. Again, don't want to point fingers, but these are errors that need to be addressed, hopefully through legislation, to have a government check on what those private sector reports are on the certification.
I think that's a tremendous segue into Commissioner Raquel Regalado. Say you don't want to point fingers, but I think constituents and your residents want fingers pointed at culpability, and I think they want answers. So, that's what originally so much of what we do. It's great to be nice and it's great to be diplomatic, and Lord knows I try to be both. But when it comes time to look at someone who did something wrong and people died, I think finger pointing is wholly appropriate. And so that takes us to the county commission.
Well, if I can say just one more thing concerning Julio just mentioned, having qualified people is a huge
Speak loud.
issue. It's a huge issue.
Talk loud so we can hear you.
Oh, I'm sorry. Having qualified people is a huge issue, but I do think that it can be done simply for instance, peer review. When I was in Miami, you have a building that's 85 stories, a panorama, and who's going to peer review that? So the building official has to understand that you must say no sometimes, because I had buildings that were 60 stories and an engineer that really only did 5-story buildings wanted to peer review that, and the reason is no, it cannot happen. And so by requiring that documentation, and we in the industry, my profession is not that many people, so I think we know who can and who can't really, and if we work it that way, I think that and you have to say no sometimes, because if you're not, how can you review a 60-story building when you've only done 5-story buildings? Sure. And so as long as we as the building officials have the backing to act accordingly, I think it's a very important issue that can be controlled. If you have someone that if you're what happens when you have a 40-year recertification in a 50-60-story building in Miami? Who's going to do that recertification? Really, okay. It should be a high-end firm that can look at that building, apply and make sure that all the issues that in that particular structure have to be addressed. Now, let's go back to what the certification came from. It came from a small building that collapsed. It wasn't a big building. It was a small building that collapsed, killed some DEA agents, and then this certification was created because of that. You don't need a large building, unfortunately, to hurt people. Small buildings are also important. So, but we must get qualifications that people that are qualified to review in the scope of the work of what is required by that review.
Yeah. Okay, Commissioner, you convened this panel as sort of a think tank as you and your colleagues look to make changes on the county legislative level. You've got to be hearing from your constituents. So, we had in the month that we were camped out outside in Surfside, the mayor was there, the chair was there. They are intimately involved. You now are becoming intimately involved. Give us your take.
Right. Well, first and foremost, I want to thank everyone. I think we've heard a lot of great points. One of the themes is that there is so much diversity within these buildings, right? And I think that's important for people to understand that there is no one-size-fits-all solution. to the issues that have been raised post Surfside, right? So the placement of the building, the geography, what it's exposed to, when it was built, how tall it is, how it was built. These are all things that are going to factor in. And I mentioned that because the number one role of government is to provide safety and security, right? So all of us are responding to that. But as Julio mentioned, we don't want it to be a knee-jerk reaction. And we definitely don't want to end up in court with a law that is repealed because it's arbitrary and capricious. So if we do decide to say 25 years for everyone without looking at the data, we will end up in court and it will be repealed. And that's why we're talking about it and we're creating a subcommittee, and I'll get into that. But really quick, I can tell you two things that are already in the works that answer some of the issues that were raised here. As Danielle mentioned, Julio had a law that required an inspection and a reserve based on that inspection. It only lasted on the books in the state of Florida for a few years. I don't know if there's the appetite to bring it back. I'm going to say no. I'm going to say that folks are going to fight back on that. But in Miami-Dade County, I've already drafted and submitted an item that will require almost the same thing based on the same data that Julio brought to the state for public housing, because it's really important for people to understand that affordable housing right now, we're looking at a lot of condominiums that are the entry point for home ownership. So the county can regulate that because we're the ones that give them those dollars. So we don't have to worry about the lobbyists in the state. I hope to have the support of the county commission, and this will require every single developer that receives public housing money in Miami-Dade County to have an inspection, to have a reserve, and to show the county how they're going to maintain those buildings and ensure that those buildings are safe. The other point that was raised by Jose had to do with the information regarding the inspection. I have another item working with the property appraiser. For those of you that follow the septic to sewer conversion, recently we passed an item where we're going to be putting information on wells and septic tanks on the property appraiser's website, so that when you pull up a property, that information will be there and it'll link to the permit. Well, this item does the same thing with the inspections. When you pull up a property, you're going to be able to see, have they put in for the permit for the 40-year inspection? Is the report there? Right now, they would have to get it from their management company. They would have to go city by city. It is going to require the cities to send the county that information. But I think, and the realtors agree, whenever someone is looking for information on a property, they go to the property appraiser's website. And that's why that's the best place to put that information, so people don't have to go digging around. And then obviously we're going to be dealing with the enforcement piece, because as a lot of folks have mentioned, what good are ordinances and laws if we can't enforce them?
And how much pushback have you gotten? Even, now it's only been a month and a half. How much behind the scenes pushback that you want to make public have you gotten from the industry, quote unquote, knowing that these changes are coming, knowing that you're looking at sort of legislation that's really going to impact them as industries in the long term?
Well, I got to tell you, my biggest concern from the very beginning was the insurance industry. And a few folks have mentioned that. We've already reached out to citizens. They are going to be part of this conversation that we're having in the subcommittee. For the most part, the stakeholders have been open to a conversation. People just want a seat at the table. And that's why we created a subcommittee where we're going to listen to this testimony. Folks are going to come from different industries, everything from property appraisers to property managers, inspectors. We're going to have contractors. We're going to have structural engineers. We're going to look at the data of how long it takes someone how long it takes an association to do this work. Because, right now we were talking about the associations and when they're negligent, some associations have reached out and said, no, actually the city and the county were negligent. It took them 3 years to give me my permit. right? So we got to look at both sides of it and base all this information on the data. So this subcommittee is going to break it up in different subjects. We're going to talk to different experts. The insurance piece is really concerning because that's happening in real time. Just so that you guys know, and I know that some of the folks on here already know this, you know, less than days after Champlain Towers collapsed, the insurance companies, Citizen being one of them, sent out letters to all these associations and said, send us your 40-year, or in 45 days, we're going to cancel your insurance. So the race is on with the insurance companies as now they determine that this is a risk that they were not considering. And the other side of this is we're going to have so many lawsuits come out of this tragedy, and that's going to make structural engineers more conservative. That's going to make insurance companies, you know, more hesitant. And what we don't want is to have buildings that are uninsurable because then they can't have mortgages. So right now we're providing everyone with a seat at the table. We're going to take all that testimony. The commission auditor is going to compile it into a report that'll go to the general committee, and then that will go to the committee that the mayor has with elected officials and to the board of county commissioners, so that whatever we consider, we look at the data and we listen to the experts so we don't have unintended consequences.
So as this subcommittee meets and goes forward, is there a way that the public can tune in, watch in real time, get those reports? How does that work?
Yes, and that's one of the reasons we did it as a subcommittee. It's going to be a broadcast from the Board of County Commissioners. Some people are going to participate through Zoom, but it's all going to be recorded. You can watch it live. It's so important for these conversations to happen in the sunshine so that people can hear the evidence that we're listening to. And we're actually reaching out to all the buildings that will be impacted by this and sending them the information on these meetings so that those associations and those homeowners can watch whether live or recorded and send us their feedback if they want it to be included in the report.
Great. Is there, I saw little blips come in. Is there a list of questions that people are sending in that we might take a few minutes to address? Can somebody see those?
I've read a bunch of them, and a lot of great questions are being asked on here. One of the ones, Glenna, is when we talk about documents and we want to see documents in Florida, good luck getting documents from your association. That's why I want to commend these ideas that the commissioner has to have government provide these documents, enforced documents. One of the biggest problems, and that's one of the reasons why we're proposing this condo fraud task force. I want you to understand that that's the biggest concern. People want to know what's going on, and they are not given information by these associations. So if we can't get it, and by the way, good luck. I'm in a battle right now with a community that has spent over $10,000 in one side. The association has spent $40,000 not to turn over documents. It would have cost $5 to put it on a flash drive. So there's an example. And so 2-3 years to get documents, hopefully with the help of county government, city government, state government, we will be able to do that. And then, of course, the issue of volunteers. You know that the biggest concern I keep hearing, and I'm seeing some of the questions, is, so what happens with volunteers? If you make this so tough, does the average Joe who doesn't know anything, where are you going to find volunteers? No one's going to want to volunteer. I have a comment. I personally say that if you get on one of these boards, this is not your local bridge club or you're not a member of the YMCA. This is serious business. You're talking about people's money, people's lives, and of course, an integrity of a building. I think there's going to be some changes on maybe requiring who is on these boards, but I'm concerned, as the commissioner said, knee-jerk reactions. We don't want to do something like that and then chase away. Nobody's going to want to be on a board, much less a volunteer that can be named in a lawsuit. Think about that.
Right, of course. I did notice one of the final questions was, where do we find the broadcast for the subcommittee? I know the answer to that one. Go to Miami-Dade.gov. Miami-Dade.gov.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I will say the Miami-Dade County's website is a very user-friendly, accessible website. So the more the public plays with it, I think the more the public who wants to be engaged in county government and business can do so. So I appreciate that as a member of the fourth estate. So thank you, everyone. This was amazingly informative and interesting. And hopefully progress will be made. And I invite you all to keep in touch with us at Local 10 as a member of the Fourth Estate that informs the public, because we are so on this also with you. I appreciate all your time. Commissioner, thank you for doing this.
Thank you all.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thank
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Have a beautiful day.
Bye.
You.